Some of the best startups historically, the biggest ones, the ones that have really shifted humanity, that have created the most value, have been the ones that have said, you know what, everybody, we're all sort of spending so much time on doing something marginally better. Here's something dramatically different. So a chip was getting slightly better, and then sort of NVIDIA comes along with GPUs. And maybe an even bigger one would be somebody coming up with something which is not even silicon. That's where you're providing the world. You're really showing your value in a demonstrous way.
The book, I understand that I read the book, watched you on a number of podcasts getting ready for our interview today. I understand you wrote it twice. So talk about that process and why you landed kind of where you're at with the book.
Amazing. So you could argue that I hit my own local maximum when I wrote the book the first time round, and we can touch on what that means. But in a nutshell, I had this passion to write this book. Since writing the book, or towards the end, I've met a lot of authors or people that have written books, and you really hear about different reasons people write books. For me, it was very much like a passion. And it came from meeting a lot of founders who I felt could really find this useful, founders or managers, etc. And the first time I wrote it in a very technical way, because a lot of the ideas in the book actually come from technology. You could call it machine learning or AI or sort of cutting edge software engineering, because most of the ideas around local maximums, or the way they call it there is local minima, but it's the same terminology and the same ideas. So a lot of the ideas come from technology, and it comes from engineers and predominantly large corporations like Amazon, Google, etc., spending billions of dollars to try and overcome this concept of a local maximum. And what I did in the book is I tried to translate it to humans. And when I wrote it the first time, it was very technical. I remember sending it to a bunch of people who were like, yeah, good idea. Very, very nice. And when you sort of do the mum test, which is this notion of trying to squeeze actual critical pieces of information out of people who just want to give you positive feedback, it was very obvious that this wasn't going to achieve the goal which I set out, which is to try and, number one, help people in their day-to-day lives, decision-making, overcome their current barriers, whether it's a business, a startup, a personal goal or anything like that. And the second goal was to maybe at the same time expose people a little bit to the way engineers think about artificial intelligence. And that's not a technical thing. You just have to talk to them about how they think about solving problems. And so the second time I was tasked with the goal of trying to write it a bit more like a Malcolm Gladwell or an Adam Grant style book, which was much harder, but actually much more fulfilling when you finally reach the end. So that was the story behind the book.
Yeah, and I think if the goal is to impact a lot more people, what an amazing starter book for just about every adult to understand the power of AI, how to think a little bit differently and all that, so they can more easily get into it. And I like your example of it's actually a better experience. It's just than what we would think of as something complicated. Like you go back in the day, and I've heard you talk about early programming and in the language and how geeky you had to be to even want to do that and stare at a screen. Well, AI is actually making, and that's my experience, is making it so much easier and better. So people are afraid of it in some ways, and I get it, it's new, but it's actually an incredible experience. And I like your metaphor of like an instrument. Just go play with it and see what happens. So talk about that a little bit, because that can help our listeners get over their resistance.
Yeah, so it's really scary. Anything you're not used to, it's scary. And there is this notion out there, which I don't think is entirely false, which is that if you didn't do sort of PHP or Java or C++ when you were 6, and then sort of, I don't know, crack the NSA code by the age you're 11, then clearly you're not cut out for coding. And those days are a little bit sort of behind us. Yes, certain types of AI development, especially on the research side, requires sort of, I don't know, a PhD in mathematics and sort of very complicated sort of equations. But that's not where coding is today. Coding is becoming higher and higher level, more and more abstract from the zero and ones. And that's because we want to make people the most useful. And just sort of typing away 0101 is not that useful. And the part people are most useful is when they're actually sort of spending more time thinking than just punching out 0101. So if you look at what's happened to computing languages, so when I started off, this was many years ago, like in high school, it was learning something called Pascal. Most people don't even know what that is. It was probably like as a C plus or something like that. And today, and by the way, if you were to read C plus or something or Pascal and give it to somebody who can read English, they would sort of understand what it says. And if you read Python, which is what a lot of people are writing today, then even somebody who's never touched computers, if you just look at a page of Python, it will look scary because it's on that black screen. But if you just print out the English, it's actually quite easy. And when you look at where it's going to with AI, it's basically what most people are doing today when they query ChatGPT, because you're literally saying, write me a script that does 1, 2, 3, 4. Check the script that you've given me, that 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're making it more and more abstract. So it means that really anybody, the barriers to entry to be a developer are becoming sort of lower and lower. Earlier today, I was sitting with a group of entrepreneurs who think that ultimately you're not going to need many developers or potentially any developers at all. And all the power will be with the VP R&D won't need people below him. He will be sort of checking that the bot developers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I think that's a little bit extreme, but the point is the power is up here. Your creativity, the way you imagine things, much more than sort of down here. Can you punch the 1010?
Yeah. Well, an evolution of the platforms of tools to make us more effective, or in my language, create value faster and hopefully holistic value. And I'm old, so I'm 63, and I remember when the first calculators came out, and I got my TI calculator, and it actually had these red LEDs at the top and the big battery pack in there. Anyway, there was a lot of resistance in school, like you can't have a calculator, and now you can't function without it, in there. And so there's like these levels as you go through. I've heard you talk about Excel and other tools. What are your thoughts on helping people kind of understand that evolution and be more okay with it?
So there's two arguments. The first is it's extremely difficult and borderline impossible to reverse technology. So it's just worth putting that out there because you're going to have to deal with it one way or another. And then the second argument is in my mind, is the one that I think you're alluding to, which one of the examples I've given is a bit like, I don't know, a financial analyst. Pre-calculator, then post-calculator, pre-Excel, then sort of post-Excel, but maybe pre-Bloomberg. I mean, I can continue this sort of, and the reality is at the beginning you're scared because there's a lot of people who their entire job pre-calculator is just doing long math. 357,423 times 400,530, like that would take somebody time to do. And that job is now obsolete. However, my hope is that person with a calculator is providing, to your point, more value to society than that person was before. So you could say we don't use calculators in this society and we're going to close off technology, etc. Long term, it's going to be hard to compete. And I would say sort of moving to AI, whether it's coding, whether it's editing this sort of interview that we're doing now. So I'm sure there's some editing to an extent to make it easier for it. So yeah, once upon a time, you probably needed an enormous studio. And per episode or per hour, it used to cost X thousands of dollars. And I don't know how much you're paying, but the point is, it's probably come down as a result of technology. And my hope is that they're still sort of doing well for themselves, the people who are editing this, because of technology, because they can do so many more at the same time. And actually, my hope is that the final product is again better because of technology. So I think AI is just going to move us up to that next level. And my strong recommendation is not to be afraid to play around with it. And if you speak to startups who are at the cutting edge of AI, a large portion of their time, effort, capital is being invested in the user interface and trying to democratize it. They know that developing applications that can then be used by scientists and sort of it is great, but the mass of the market is not there. It's can you make GPT-4 or what they today call Copilot for, I don't know, video editors, Copilot for teachers, Copilot for educators. I mean, I've heard Copilot for, and you name it, and I've heard the pitch at least twice. So the point is, it's trying to democratize this and bring it to everybody in society.
Yeah. So I have a bit of a theory here that if you're really leaning in to do something and create more value in a particular area and you see something that will help you do it more effectively, you get excited about it and you jump on it. But if you're just kind of going through the motions and stuff comes up and the world's changing, I go, it's like overwhelming and you're probably not really in the game on the front line trying to create value in your area. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not. But I'm calling here from my music studio. And I play guitar my whole life. I've got over 1,000 nights on stages. It's so much fun. I look at it as emotional energy, positive emotional energy value being created in such a big way. But the gear that I play through, and I've had everything, and now they've digitized it to where anything that was ever made that was cool, speaker cabinets, preamps, anything and everything. Now for about $2,700 in one unit that I use, I get it all. And it would cost you $50 million to go have all that gear. And so I have friends that are traditionalists and I just want my, particular amp and they're lugging around all this gear and I have my tiny little thing I bring in and it sounds infinitely better than what they're doing, but they're resisting. And I just love it. Like, what's the next thing? Where's it gonna, what's gonna be next? That's a great example of it, right?
Yeah, yes. If you're a guitar player, then I would say you've got some people out there, the minority, who are using technology or trying to learn how to use AI, like learning guitar in a classical way. So notes, fingers, note by note, reading notes, etc. Ultimately, like this is doing C++, PHP, maybe even some maths, and only down the line, let's make something sound nice and bring it all together. And those are sort of the researchers, and those are great. The vast majority are doing it like jazz. Give me a few chords. They're really easy. Within 20 minutes, you can teach somebody 4 or 5 chords, and you can basically play any song you want. Within 25 minutes, you can use very simple AI tools that are out there, and you can basically do anything you want. And so I would encourage people, even if you're not the classic music player who wants to start from scratch and go 10,000 hours and build your way up, go the jazz route, because very quickly you'll get 4 chords and you'll be doing a whole bunch of stuff with AI.
Yeah, that's a super powerful way to think about AI. That was perfect. So my understanding of the local maximum, given a current approach, a business model, for example, if I just take an organization example, no matter how hard we press in, this is the best we're probably going to do, and we can make incremental improvements. And that may not be the right thing. And sometimes you have to go down to go up, as you talk about in the book. I say burn it down and start over again. And my biggest example of that is I had $27 million into a venture, and I just shut the thing down and wrote off 27 million, went a completely different direction. And everything I learned there can obviously, I think maybe not obviously, but can help me make all that back and some. But that's my biggest example of tearing something down, just looking at it as not working. Why do you think business, founders, business leaders will stay on something? And you brought up Theranos, you brought up Blockbuster, will stay somewhere and not get off that track and not see it, not step back. So help us think through that a little bit.
So I'll make, so very quickly, as you mentioned, a local maximum is defined as a maximum, meaning you're at the top of something. The easiest analogy for me is a mountain. So you're in the middle of a desert. You're at the top of a mountain. So you really can't go further up because you're at the top of a mountain, but you can see that there are other mountains around you that are higher. And higher in this analogy is better. And so you're at a maximum, you want to get higher, you're stuck at a place, and the only way to get to a higher point is by coming down. And now to answer your question, there's really sort of three parts of that process. The first one is when you start climbing the mountain, very often business leaders are just asking, like, is this a good mountain? So is the business that I'm going to set out to build, in your case, does it sound like a good one? Or whatever, if I'm a manager in a department, I've got a strategy. Is this a good one? And I spend the vast majority of my time saying, is the current way I'm doing something good? Is it bad? How could I optimize it? So we talk about A/B testing and things like that. But I'm focused the vast majority of the time on, is it good? Could I make it a bit better, etc.? Very rarely do people ask, is it the best? Is there a dramatically better one out there? Could I do something that would change my understanding of the landscape that would then tell me that there's a dramatically better mountain out there? And there's a lot of stories in the book where I talk about sort of how people sort of went wrong, and both businesses and personal stories, and they just start climbing a mountain. So that's the first part. The second part is when you're climbing, the vast majority of us are sort of like very narrowly focused. We decided a while ago this is the mountain, and now our entire sort of mind frame is on just, can we move up? So a step back is bad, a step forward is good. How do I make sure that next day, week, month, I'm incrementally better than I was yesterday? And here, one of the things that I make a number of suggestions and I give sort of analogies for, but just to be concise, there's a number of strategies that AI takes when it's climbing to constantly try and make sure that something hasn't developed or there isn't a better mountain elsewhere. So in Google search or in Amazon Prime, when it's looking for the fastest route or the best results in Google, or in NVIDIA doing optimization routing for their GPU, or any one of these examples, Walmart on their website, when they're trying to decide what to show you, they decide on a mountain, they start climbing the mountain, but during the climb, they're sending out so-called sort of binoculars or individuals who are scouting far off places to see, one second, is there a better mountain that I am unaware of? And they're doing metaphorically things like building bridges so that if I suddenly find one, I could potentially hop over there. And we could talk about how people do that in their personal lives, etc. And then, but it's very difficult because people at that point are very focused. I decided this is my goal, and I'm going to go sort of full speed ahead. And like, it could be a goal that you're doing for 10, 20 years of your life. And then finally, when you are nearing the top or potentially at the top, that's when some of the things that you mentioned become very difficult. So there's things like sunk cost and different fallacies and all that comes into play. But here, at this point in time, it's really very difficult. At this point in time, I mean, so if you think about it, let's say there are two mountains, one mountain that you're climbing and a much higher one behind it. I mean, the reality is every step up you're taking on the wrong mountain could potentially be a painful step down you're going to have to take later. My guess is, I mean, you sound like I know this as a venture capitalist. For a founder to write off or to throw away $27 million, it's a difficult decision. My guess is if that number was $2.7 million, it would have been much easier. The point is, and if it was $270 million, even if it's the right decision, it's harder. So the point is that the higher sometimes the local maximum and the harder it was to climb it, potentially the more difficult it is to give it up. So I think there's challenges every step along the way to overcoming this local maximum trap.
Yeah, time and investment resources can make it tough to give up for sure. But I finally got into a place where it was the only decision. And each time I do it with clients, it's the only decision. Like, this is not working. How much more do you want to lose? And it took me a long time to get there. And so with your experience, like, this is a whole mindset shift that you're talking about, being able to look at like this. How long are you seeing it takes for leaders to move significantly in that direction? I would think it could be years. But what are you finding?
I mean, it's really hard for me to generalize and provide an answer. I do find, I mean, I wrote the book because I have every night probably two conversations with founders, just given that's what I do, sit on boards and invest in early stage companies. And a huge portion of these conversations had this notion of a local maximum to some extent at the heart of it. And it doesn't always mean we're at the top of some mountain and we have to leap onto another. I'll give just a different example. A founder has a product. It's really catching on very quickly, but he's giving it out for free. And the question is, do you start charging and monetizing, or do you carry on just growing this way and making your users catch on? And often the founders will come to me and be like, well, I mean, you're very friendly, you seem very nice, cheerful, etc. But what about all the other investors? Are they going to like the fact that I'm postponing the fact that I'm monetizing and showing sort of hard goods that I'm bringing home in recurring revenue in some shape or form? And often the conversation will get to a place where, like, let's talk about the mountains you're trying to climb. If you push off trying to monetize, does that lead us to a dramatically bigger company? If yes, persuading the other investors is not going to be difficult. If not, and you're being scared of it for a variety of reasons, and actually it might lead us to a smaller company, everybody's right to be like, come on, start telling people to pay for what you're giving them. So even like a trivial question like that, at the heart of it, we'll have a question around where is the mountain? What is the global maximum in the challenge that we're trying to achieve? And I'll make another point there. Often founders say, well, what are the metrics I have to hit for the next round? And I get it. Like, they want something really easy you can take home and say, okay, I need this amount of revenue, that number of clients, and this amount of runway, and then I've got my next round. And while that might be true, I mean, I think most VCs, and I'm just giving the examples from this world, are thinking, what is the mountain they're climbing? How likely are they going to get to the top? And how big is the top? So actually, let's say you don't hit any one of your KPIs and it's a total shamble, but you're still able to show me that you, for whatever reason, are highly likely to achieve a tremendous sort of outcome. You're more likely to get investors to lean in than if you've hit every single one of the KPIs and you're true to your word, and every time you've said something, you've hit it, but it's leading to an outcome which in reality is unlikely to be particularly big. Doesn't matter if whatever happens. So like, yeah, I think it just creeps into a lot of the language and the outlook, as you mentioned.
And I think early on, and I love the space you're at, because that's where I love going from 0 to 1, and I love operating, and doesn't matter what the size is. It's so much fun for me. But I think from 0 to 1, what I'm more excited about is coming up with a business model that has scalable traction, and then there's predictability. Now it becomes about execution. And so it's that first piece of going from 0 to 1, establishing this believable model, provable, scalable traction. You know, the idea's really been vetted. This is where you're talking about, right? I mean, we're right in there and trying to come out the other side to be able to execute. And this mindset of, the local maximum and, is this the best way? I would think that would help them a lot going through. This is something you're doing different in your VC company than I've heard of before. What other things are you doing there? Or just talk about that in general. Like, what are you doing different to help startup founders get there faster because of your approaches?
Yeah. So just to highlight on that first point, and I'm happy to mention the second. So a big part is trying to find what we call founders and teams going after an X idea rather than A/B testing or slightly improving on whatever's already out there. So if you're thinking about the mountains, and one of my favorite examples in the book is the Olympian Fosbury, Dick Fosbury. So I love it. He was not a good high jumper, he talks about this in interviews saying, I was good enough to make the team in college, but I wasn't even the best on the team, who not long afterwards won the Olympic gold medal. So, like, how the hell does a guy who's not a good high jumper win the Olympic, right? This is not like a school play, the Olympic gold medal. I also like it that his background was engineering and he was a bit of a geek and all that sort of helped sort of my story. But the point is, he said everybody was trying to optimize, to A/B test this scissor jump. So you run and sort of jump one leg over the other. And he said, because I was sort of okay, but just not good enough, I was sitting down every night thinking, I have to try a radically different approach, an X. So a SpaceX or something completely different that I may fail, but if it succeeds, it's wildly better. And then he came up with this flop, which is today called the Fosbury flop, of sort of flopping over backwards, etc. And literally, he destroyed the competition. And then the funny thing is, like, which is actually the end of the story, or is that then everybody realizes it, and then they destroy his world record, like, by over a foot, because again, he wasn't a particularly good high jumper, at least at that standard. So a big focus, and I would say founders globally should be thinking about this, and even just not just, but like managers in their jobs, they should be asking, what am I doing on my day-to-day, which is an A/B test, which is marginally better. Tomorrow is hopefully a little bit better than today. A week's time is hopefully a bit better than last week, and just moving up. Okay. And then what are the things I'm spending time on, which may go bust? Okay. It could be that I spend a lot of time that I have to write off. It could be capital that I have to pivot from, or product, or ideas that I come to my boss and say to him, this is something I want you to trust me with. But what of my day-to-day am I putting on an X that could move me from one mountain to a dramatically better mountain? And that's something that I think that some of the best startups historically, the biggest ones, the ones that have really shifted humanity, to your point, that have created the most value, have been the ones that have said, you know what, everybody, we're all sort of, I don't know, spending so much time on doing something marginally better. Here's something dramatically different. So a chip was getting slightly better, slightly better, slightly better. And then sort of NVIDIA comes along with GPUs. And maybe an even bigger one would be somebody coming up with something which is not even silicon. Or so, like, that's where you're providing the world, to your point, sort of, you're really showing your value in a demonstrous way. I'm happy to talk about other stuff we do at Hertz in particular, but like, for me, and this was, and you can hear it now in my voice, was a big part of the passion of behind the book, and where the passion lies.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So when I read the book, it was this past weekend. It was two very short sittings. Well, it was a few hours, but it would have been one if I had the time to, but I ran out of time. So anyway, fast forward this morning, I have a couple of meetings. There's actually 3 different businesses that I currently operate. And I'm meeting with a team, and they love the concept of the local maximum. And they said, look, there's many mountains inside the company that we need to climb down from. So it's I think it's a mindset that should go to every single leader. And they came up with something that they just kept iterating on, and it wasn't quite right. And so we're redoing the whole thing. But anyway, here's the bigger picture. And we burned down a number of things and started over since I took this thing over in May of last year. And now they're just from one meeting this morning, they got it, and they started identifying the mini mountains inside the business to climb down from. I don't know if you've heard. Isn't that cool?
Amazing. It's so amazing. I love hearing it. And I'll mention something else. Like, what I find is that a lot of the mountains, sometimes the hardest ones to climb down from, but the most important, are psychological ones. So people trap themselves into this notion of, this is our company's goal. This is what the feature has to do, or even though this is what I'm good at. So, I mean, I don't know if I even put it in the book, but there was this one example that in New York, where I remember, like, everyone was coming into the pizza shop, but buying the juice. And you went up to obviously the Italian family that I went speaking to them. Then they were like, I said to them, why don't you call this juice? Like, I was literally taking a Zoom there on the laptop, and everybody was coming in for the juice, and the juice was great. The pizza was awful. And I remember saying to them, why don't you just brand this as juices? And I was like, when you're joking, we're Italian, we sell pizza. And I was thinking, like, no, you're great at making juice. Like, this is what you're great at. And pizza, maybe not so much. But yeah, and obviously you can see that with companies and the rest of it. And by the way, you mentioned earlier Blockbuster and Netflix. So I think a lot of this was also psychology, because one of the big tellings when I was going through the case study and reading a lot of interviews online. So my favorite part there was the CEO of Blockbuster, literally sort of maybe it was a year or even months before going bust. He said, I have this fascination with Netflix. Or I don't understand this fascination with Netflix that everyone's going on about. There isn't anything that Blockbuster doesn't already do that Netflix is currently trying to do. The point being, everything these guys have, we have, and more. And it was some quote, I can find it exactly. And the point that was really telling to me is, I think he was right. I think there isn't a single thing that Blockbuster couldn't do and already didn't have. They had streaming, they had all the content, they had a platform. I think the challenge was, if you would have gone down the corridors of Blockbuster and said, what is the goal for next year? Which mountain are we climbing? They would have talked about DVD rentals. And that was a tiny mountain. If they would have told you the problems that they would have, and you do see this in the case studies there, they would have told you late payments, people holding the DVDs and not returning them on time, running all these. They wouldn't even talked about this other business. Yeah, they had it in their back pocket, but they were just climbing the wrong mountain. And if you would have gone to Netflix, they would have said, like, who the hell cares about that? A lot of it, I think, is up there in your head.
Yeah, and I'm super familiar with what you're talking about. I've studied it as well. And there's a whole lot that goes into one of my maxims, which is do less better. But yeah, I could see why. The biggest part of that value creation machine that Blockbuster had was the actual rentals, and the store locations and everything else. Looking at where technology is going, where the market's going, and all that, the other significantly bigger, significantly higher margins. How can you step back and see that? So I see why they're trapped, and I think you're completely right. The psychological barrier is probably the biggest around these local maximums. For probably just about everybody. Now, one big difference I'm seeing when I work with startup founders, those that are really focused on creating huge value in the marketplace, solving a problem, like they're passionate about that. That's one group. And a bigger group are those that are looking for some way to make as much money as possible, the easiest way that I can, and look for a hack. They fail well over 90% of the time, whereas the others make it virtually 90+% of the time, even if it's just a nice, viable, business moving along. That's what I'm noticing is the single biggest difference when I work with founders. Between those that make it and those that don't make it, what are you seeing?
Obviously, passion to the problem rather than just making money is very, very helpful. But so one of the parts in the book, which I alluded to this because I really wanted to keep the book as short as possible. I find it's easy to write sometimes something very long. So for me, it was cutting down and sort of stripping things out, which the publisher didn't always like. But for me, it was a passion project. I wanted it to be something I was proud of. But there was a part towards the end when I talked about dangerous mountains. So mountains that might be high, so potentially very good, but you still don't always want to climb it. And so one of the mountains that I drew there was sort of comparing two mountains. One of them is very smooth, goes up and down, and could be very big. And then the other one has a ton of ups and so imagine it's a bit like my fingers now. So here's the top, but to get there, you've literally got to go up, then down, then up, then down until you reach this point. It's really, really volatile. And the point is, you really have to ask yourself, is that a mountain I'm willing to climb? The ups are great, but the downs are bloody painful. And you're right, not always do you manage to get back up afterwards, but a startup is much more like this than the smooth mountain that goes the whole way up and down. And so one of the things that a group of founders that have passion, like deep connection to solving the problem, they often have the resilience to go up and then down and then up and then down and then up and then down. And so whether it's an amazing exit at the end or an M&A or just a great company or something that's smaller, they're just more likely to make it. And the ones who are saying, 1 second, I'm every single day going to do a calculation of, is this the most likely way for me to make money? There's probably going to be a point in time in the startup's life cycle that the answer to that will be no. And actually to succeed, you're going to have to, like Netflix, like Amazon, there was probably points in their career, the founder's career, where maybe the best logical thing would be just to drop it and go elsewhere. But they had something that against odds told them, I'm going to persist. So I think your point is spot on. When you hear about the founder, and I'm making this up, who says, my father and grandfather and mother passed away from this same illness, and my daughter's got the gene, and I'm saying this because I'm making it up. And he said, what I'm out to do is to solve this healthcare problem, and I'm dedicating my life to it. You're not quite as concerned that a rainy day is going to come and the guy's going to give up. And so whether he succeeds in the end or gets just really far is less of a question. So yeah, one of the questions you've got to ask yourself, regardless if you're a founder of a company or just about to start on any sort of climb, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, is how volatile is this mountain? And am I willing to take that on? Don't be a politician if you don't want to get sort of bad mouths, whether it's right or wrong. Don't be a soccer player or a player if you're not willing to be benched or miss a penalty shot. That will happen. Don't be an entrepreneur if you think it's going to go smoothly and you don't think there will be nights you literally don't sleep. That will happen. So I think the volatility is a key element. And to your point, I totally agree that people that connect with the passion usually will have the resilience as well.
Yeah. And the resiliency is such a big part of it. And I think there it's a perspective around struggle. More and more, I don't know what it's like in Israel, but in the United States, there seems to be this culture of we need to take all struggle away from everybody. And if something's hard, they act like a victim. Adults, I mean, kids do it for sure. The best of intentions, parents are taking struggle away, but they're not getting ready for adulthood by doing that, taking healthy struggles away. But now I'm seeing it in adults, and I'm seeing it in a really big way. So the resiliency to me is like the harder it is, that's the faster we're going to grow and learn. And I was thinking about AI and that it's the next level of tools. If we're leaning into create value, we're excited about using it. We can go faster in all of it. But in this culture of removing any and all struggle, what are your thoughts on, for our listeners, not using AI in a way to make your life so easy, you kind of lose the growth struggle, which is 100% necessary in my view.
So I 100% agree. I think I don't know of a story where everything just came easily. Very often when you have conversations with founders and managers, you're actually looking for places where they failed and they came back, ideally stronger. There's a lot of research around founders or leaders, managers who have a background in something like sports, where they really are able to sort of continue and push yourself. So again, I come from soccer and football, but you're imagining the kid from a young age who's just let in the third goal, so it's 3-0 down, terrible, and still picks the ball up as the captain at the age of 8 and walks to the middle of the field and puts it back on. We're already kicking it. We're starting again. It's 3-0 down and we carry on playing. Like, that is a trait that you're building. One cute thing that I came across very recently is my oldest son, who's 9, and he goes to an afternoon sort of program for somewhat gifted style kids where it's supposed to push them further. And he's only 9. And what they did, they have a few classes, but one of the classes they had this semester was juggling. and acrobat, like doing acrobat with sticks and all these type of things. And I went up literally a few weeks ago. It was like Parents' Day where we came to see what they were doing. And I went up to the teacher. I was like, just curious to know, like they were tested mainly in maths and logic. And now you're doing sort of juggling. And the answer was nobody is good at juggling. And the only way you get good at juggling is to carry on picking the ball up and throwing it in the air. So we want to make sure that every time they come during the weeks that they're here, they're spending an hour getting used to picking up the balls or the sticks because they can choose whichever one they want to do. And they slowly see that they can overcome it. It was just, I was just thinking like, we're looking for something cheap to do with them for an hour. And I was like, the parents like, oh, bloody hell, that was a good answer. I mean, well done to you. But to your point, it's 100% that. It's picking the ball up and going to the middle of the court, or picking the ball up and trying to juggle again, and proving to yourself that actually you need to know how to deal with struggles, with failure, and persist.
Yeah, I've kind of gotten to a place where the harder it is, and I like to stay in this band of being uncomfortable that gets, higher and higher over time. And it's just my comfort range with that. But I'm at a place where the harder it gets, I start to feel pretty good inside. Like this is going to be amazing when I come out the other side, as long as I'm having the right conversations, doing the right stuff. But because when you do that enough times, like, that this is going to be fantastic. And if you don't do it, that stays with you. Like, 'cause this was an opportunity missed, in a big way. In the time we have left, and if you could see the screen behind my computer, I've got all these questions, and we're not even through 5% of them. The usefulness of AI and then the downside of AI. So when I think about AI, and I've got a number of clients, and they're all trying to figure out what do we do with this, and just generally, I think helps us get answers, predict the next word or thing faster to insights, save time, think differently. Leverage our data in a different way. At a high level for businesses, how should they think about AI and how it can help them create value even faster for their customers?
I would suggest that most businesses, or even all businesses, on a very regular basis, ask themselves, what are the areas AI can increase our value? So 1 + 1 is potentially 7. It's really not going to be 2 or 3. It's going to be something very big. And at the same time, what are the vulnerabilities that we now have that could potentially completely destroy our business? When I speak to businesses, they're all doing the first. Probably not as regularly as I think they should, because actually AI is changing faster than even some of the experts predicted. So you really want to be bringing somebody in who can give you 10 wacky ideas, but that will generate others. I'll just make another comment on that. So I used to do sort of talks of creative thinking for businesses, where I used to come and do sort of like a session of a couple of hours. And one of the exercises I used to do at the very beginning is I used to do a magic trick with cards and then ask everybody I don't care if you know how I did the trick or you don't. I want to know, how do you think I could have done the trick? So give me ways that this trick could have happened, and I'll tell you at the end if that's the way I did it or not, but just give me ideas. And then you can see slowly people are expanding the way they're thinking. So at the beginning, it's like, well, the whole deck is full of kings. Actually, you had a few more up your sleeve. But then slowly, somebody would say something like, maybe you actually are a magician. Like, let's not rule that possibility out. And I know it sounds crazy, but like, let's not rule that possibility out. Maybe the cards actually can fly. And then let's go back. And then they'll have more creative ideas, but in the more sort of real world. So I would say you want to bring in somebody from AI or who can see some of the cutting edge stuff that are happening in completely different worlds, and just keep checking that you're not missing the 1 + 1 is 7. Because I think that will happen in a ton of businesses and in very unpredictable ways. So that's sort of the first thing that I would encourage people to do quite frequently. In the mountain analogy of climbing, I would say you're usually climbing a mountain and every so often looking over your head. You want to keep checking for binoculars and further distances if there's bigger mountains. And if I suddenly tell you there was a very big earthquake that is completely changing the landscape, you're going to want to do more binocular looking and searching around than before that, because there's more chance that a large mountain has suddenly been created right next to you, or something that might be suitable for you. So the earthquake is AI, that's happening now. And so you want to lift your head up more than in the past. And the same thing I've just said, I would say again, just the other side of the coin. And I think it's just fun to do the first and less fun to do the second. But I hear of too many businesses that are like, yeah, we all know that AI is a threat to us, but we just don't want to talk about it. We're focusing on the upsides. And that's just unlikely to be a successful long-term strategy. And so I would be doing the exact same things. Or if I go back to the card trick, one of the questions would have been like, what is the worst way I could have done this card trick? And now let's go back to the better trick. So sometimes these things can lead to positive ideas as well. But my recommendation would mainly be to do this with somebody who comes from the AI world, who doesn't have to necessarily talk technically, but just tell you, by the way, this is happening in healthcare. And by the way, this is how PE firms are thinking about real estate with cutting edge AI. And by the way, just so that you know, like a very old company like Duns and Bradstreet are now thinking about their business in a completely different way because of AI like this. And whether this works or not, here's some positives. And doing the exact same thing with negatives. So like, this is a company that was worth $4 billion, was just filed for Chapter 11. And actually, like, let me show you some of the founders. They're pretty smart. And let me show you some of their investors. Like, they're pretty smart as well. And so, like, yeah, I would be doing those more frequently.
Yeah, I love the idea of having a consultant that's really connected with a cutting edge part of AI to come in and help this way. But as I think about the practical application of it, we need to figure out a way to lay out the elements of the business to say, these are the things we're doing. This is our model. Where can the latest advancements in AI help us do it better and protect us from the downside risk? Like presenting it in a way, like listening, like connecting the dots. I've actually learned to never underestimate an adult's ability to never connect the dots. And so listening to somebody talk about AI, them being able to take it and practically use it to create more value, I think is a challenge. So there has to be some process there of how to present it in a way where this expert could really help. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would say there's one of two things. Either you want the expert to actually solve or deal with the challenge, and then you've got to get things ready. And it's like typical sort of, I don't know, McKinsey come in, you want to have everything prepared for them. You want to make the most of their time. They're going to go through all the weeds for you. Or it's the other way around. Bring in the expert to just dazzle you with things that are going on. They're not going to provide you the solution. They might throw out lots and lots and lots of hooks. But one thing will lead to another, and ideally will make your team, which knows the problem inside out, which knows the company inside out, actually think of the solutions. For me, nearly always am I dealing with the second rather than the first. Most of our companies are not the type of companies that are going to bring in a big consulting firm or even a consultant for a very long period of time. What is more likely to happen is, well, I mean, I sometimes as a board member and somebody invested with this, but or somebody else will come in and be like, guys, look, let me give you 10 ideas, which are all terrible, but just things that are happening in the ecosystem and things that could potentially be related to your company. Nearly never does one of my ideas or concepts link directly to the solution. But I would say well over 50% of the time, one of the C-level, one of the leadership members of the team will then say, now I have an idea. And like, that's actually the golden idea, because he or she understands the challenges. They are in the business. And by the way, they've solved half the problems in their head. Oh, no, this department does that. No. That's how I would imagine it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to touch on the other side of AI. So really the downside of what could go wrong. And I'm thinking about just getting bad information, like, oh, it fed it back, it must be right, but it's not right, and then that can lead to what it leads to. Intentionally modeling AI to basically cause nefarious outcomes to happen. And then one of to me, the most powerful weapon in recorded history is weaponizing false morality. So we're being told something is good, like by far the most powerful weapon, I think. We're being told something is good. Everybody goes, buy it. We should trust our government. This is what they're telling us is good. Everything else is being censored. AI is making that easier to do it. And then we go down this really bad road. And throughout recorded history, this happens over and over and over again. Now the tools are way more powerful to do it when the wrong people that, they get into leadership, they're not capable or moral. They're capable of doing bad things, but not capable of creating better conditions for the citizenry. And they're not moral. How do we develop filters as we move into this? Because I want all the benefits of AI, and I want none of the downside, but I need to be aware of what's possible. I know you've had to have thought a lot about this.
Yes, it's really difficult, and lots of people much cleverer, better. Like, it's a really big challenge. And the reality, I mean, I'm not going to argue that AI is all good. It's a tool, it's a technology, and it's going to be very hard to reverse. And the flip of what we've been talking about, that it's easier to use, democratized, wildly sort of more power. There's a flip side to that. And we're going to see that. We're going to see that in two ways. We're going to see that intentionally, meaning actual bad actors trying to use AI in a whole variety of ways. And we'll see that unintentionally when AI is put into production and just goes out of whack for whatever reason. We can chat about when and how. And people are trying to mitigate both of them. But the reality is, whether it's governments or just like regulators are, as always, 10 years behind or really trying to play catch up. And where I would say we are today is in a challenging / dangerous environment, and it could get trickier. And so, like everything, there are solutions, but it's going to be difficult. And yeah, there's a downside, and it's a meaningful one. And I'll throw out one which is sort of counterintuitive, but it's a really small one that I think everybody should just be aware of. And that is, every time there's a piece of technology that does something for us, we outsource some of our day-to-day functionality to the technology to ideally make us more efficient or just happier doing what we're doing, etc. So if I query something on Google, then I'm saying I don't want to have to go and search by myself in a million different ways, which might be very complicated. Come and show me what I should be looking at. So make my life easier. And what Google is doing is saying, here's the results. And if Google decides whether it's for ads reasons or to manipulate me in some shape or form and say, these are the results you should look at, very few people will requery Google in 4 or 5 different ways to make sure they're actually getting a more, or go onto DuckDuckGo or some other search engine, Bing, to make sure that things are actually more holistic. We weren't used to outsourcing that, and we sort of are okay with it. AI is taking this a step further. We're handing over more to the technology. And I'll just give one example here, which is that when you query, I'm just giving ChatGPT as an example, but because it's the most frequently used, very rarely is it saying to me, these are the answers, this is the multiple answers that different people have looked at. For this one, go to that website. For this one, go to this website. For this. No. It is saying, this is the answer to your question. So it's not even giving me a variety of, like, some people are trying to, some engineers are now trying to force some of these engines to say, if there's 2 opposing opinions or multiple, use wording in a certain way to allude or say some people think or whatever, because they're not trying to necessarily be bad actors. But what we've really done is said to ChatGPT, don't just search and give me multiple, and Google tries to make sure they're different on purpose so that it increases the chance of you clicking. What GPT is doing is saying, this is the answer. I've chosen the right answer. I've even gone to the source for you and given you the bottom line of what I think you need to know. So I'm not saying this is necessarily just bad and just good. There's definitely just bad things that we have to be aware of in AI. And we can talk about that. There's sometimes unintentionally or intentionally. But as humans, one thing we can try and learn and take home here is we need to train ourselves that when we interact with these, we are increasingly aware of the extra responsibility, the extra offload that we've taken from ourselves onto the technology, and we get more used to or prone to, one second, I'm going to ask this question again in a number of different ways.
I think that was super powerful, really useful tools. I mean, I've actually gotten to a place where no matter what I see or hear, I don't take it at face value. It's like maybe, and I've developed my own filters, and it's all through the value creation lens. Will this create net positive value based on all my experiences? And if the answer is yes, then I'll look into it more. But I don't believe hardly anything anymore. And AI has made that even worse for me, if that's even a bad thing. But the filters, I think, are really important that we developed.
Yeah, but to be fair, you are, from the conversation, quite extreme. You've written off $27 million to pivot. You like being in that uncomfortable bracket of sort of, I want to sort of really, so it doesn't surprise me that you're also in that bracket when it comes to AI. But when we think about broader society, most of them wouldn't have done any one of those three. And actually, I think the third is the one that least people do. And I think that's going to creep into more and more products. So I would say you should ideally be training people to think the way you do, just to not take it at face value.
Well, that's a big part of why I'm doing this podcast. My whole purpose is to drive holistic value creation behaviors out into the world and do all three in balance: material, emotional energy, connectedness on the spiritual side. Everything feels better. And by the way, you actually make more money. That's my experience with my companies and the folks that I work with when you think about it that way. As we wrap up here, was there any one insight or big takeaway for you in this conversation that was slightly or significantly different in how you think about things? Or
I would say a few, but if I just pick one, and I think it's important for your listeners to know that I think you do a really good job. So I'm sure they listen to a number of your podcasts, but I've done quite a few of these now. And I can tell, number one, you came prepared. You've really done your research, and you're obviously, they hear all the rest of it, but the first two, I'm sure they don't all know. And it's worth saying this, that like the other three brackets, most people are not like that. Most people wouldn't write off $27 million. And most people are not in the uncomfortable place. Most people don't listen to, or think that most of the things they have to double check with AI or that technology is giving them. And I can say that a majority, at least, of interviewers don't always do the type of research that Lee has done here. So I can give a verification that probably the other things or the other interviews are going through a similar process, and this is impressive.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, I usually spend minimum 6 up to 12 hours getting ready for each discussion because I am really interested and I want to create value around this. And I hope to have you back someday to go even deeper. I've got a whole bunch more questions. If this was interesting for you, I'd love to continue the conversation someday. If our listeners want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, where should they go?
There's a website, judahtub.com. If the book is of interest, it's easiest to be found on Amazon. So How to Look Up Where the Only Way is Down. And again, thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it. I'm going to have my entire teams really read the book. I recommend everybody listening to this podcast read the book. It's one of the most powerful perspective changing books that I've read in a long time. So I love it. Great job. I'm so glad that you did that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Lee.
All right. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.